So the attempt here to do a peer review for appendicitis, one of the cohorts that were submitted last year, we're going to try to see, there is no way for peer review. We're currently saying our process of the phenotype library in OHDSI is that somebody work on a definition, use the tools to understand the performance of it, and then write a summary of that and submit it to the library. Before it goes to the library, accept it to the library, another collaborator should peer review it and make an opinion to either accept it or reject it or require modification. But we have not structured this process. We have no idea how it works. We don't know what to do. So part of the Phenotype Phebruary is try to learn from real examples and real experience how we can, if we can structure this process, or if it's valuable, if there's any point, or it's only people making some opinions, because that's not very useful. So one of the experiments is what we're going to do today, and I'm going to be the facilitator of the peer review, but all of you here can voice opinion, and we can see if at the end of this session, an hour, we can come up with a recommendation on this phenotype, either reject it, think of modification, or say, well, this is good, or we can't really have an opinion. So this is how we're going to run this. Another full disclosure is we just finished a full week of hands down technical week with Patrick and the group in Janssen. So Gowtham and I are extremely tired, but we're gonna do this. So we'll see how horrible we're gonna be today. Okay. So I have I'm proposing this outline. Gowtham is the submitter, so we're gonna I'm gonna give Gowtham 3 minutes just to go quickly about what does the word appendicitis mean without any details. He already have the submission, which we're gonna put on the screen. Just high level, what is appendicitis, and how is the patient, how mentally we can all imagine the patient's that manifest in our data. Then Gowtham going to walk through the cohort definition he submitted. For people who are not familiar with the tools we're going to use Atlas to just go over the definition in terms of what's the entry criteria, what's the inclusions or exclusions, and how are we looking at these events, stitching them together in eras, and so forth. And then, as part of the way I would do a peer review is I am lucky because I do have a resource that allows me to look at a systematic literature review of prior work that included phenotyping appendicitis. So that's something that I have access to. I understand not all people will have access to, but I have a literature review that has been already done and abstracted the prior appendicitis phenotypes that has been included in prior observational studies, and some of them may be validated. And I will look at this data as kind of as a way to see if what Gowtham has done is consistent with others. If there's some phenotypes that are validated and proposed that Gowtham is completely ignoring or not considering, whether it's code or inclusion criteria and so forth. And then we're going to use our tools. So in the post that Gowtham proposed for appendicitis, as a way of evaluating his phenotype, is he went over cohort diagnostics. So he already digested the results and wrote a brief summary. So I'm going to go over that brief summary and then try to quickly see if I can replicate his observations in the tool, and if we can see if we agree with his interpretation of this descriptive data. And then if we are lucky, we will have pre-evaluated results, because Gowtham had not submitted pre-evaluated results as part of submission. So I requested that, and he was trying to complete that today while we were in the session. So we'll see and then we'll look at this data and interpret. At the end of the time, at the end of this, we're going to have comments on the content, but we're also going to have comments on the documentation on how Gowtham presented this phenotype, and if there's some data, some things that were in his logic that were not explicit in his documentation, and so we can comment on that. And at the end, I will put this all together and post it as a revision or response of Gowtham's submission for appendicitis. Okay, so Gowtham, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to go over the your submission.
Yeah. Oops. Should I share my screen as because you wanted me to talk about the clinical idea?
Yeah, okay. I was going to post it out here. I was going to show it to you. Do you want to do it on your screen?
Okay, you can show. Go to. You're sharing the literature review document, I think.
Hold on. Oh, I thought I pulled it out. Okay, if it's up in your
screen.
screen.
Let me take over the screen. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So everybody, can you see my screen?
Any question? Does this make sense to everybody?
Yeah, we're not seeing your screen.
Two different
don't see it.
screens at the same time, Asa. That's too much for us.
All right, I'm sharing my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, so this is the OHDSI. This is the post that we're referencing. This is the Phenotype February 2023 P3 Appendicitis interactive session. So again, you are all the peer reviewers. I am the submitter. We're learning together on this process. So this was developed about 2 years ago, and I am somebody developed it, documented it, and I have just transcribed it into an OHDSI forum post. So clinical idea, appendicitis, as you know, is an inflammation of an organ called appendix. It's pretty usually acute in onset. Within 24 hours, it will manifest itself, usually, sometimes 2 days. Very rarely will it become chronic. That's like an edge case. But there's a classical presentation, usually a younger person, a periumbilical pain that then migrates to the right lower quadrant. There'll be tenderness, and they'll start feeling nausea, vomiting, and they usually are taken to the hospital, and there they are diagnosed with appendicitis. So the gold standard treatment is surgery, although in milder and in questionable cases, an antibiotic may be dispensed. The symptoms, most of the most common presentation is what I described, but in the extremes there may be the tenderness of the abdomen, including all the way to perforated appendix, which could be very severe. The most severe cases could be life-threatening and could cause death. The differential diagnosis is pretty broad. It can go from ovarian causes to the cecal causes to ectopic pregnancies, renal, and so on. So there's a broad differential diagnosis here, but it's a pretty mature clinical idea, and most clinicians know how to manage it. Prognosis, if diagnosed early and can be easily treated mostly with surgery, and then quick recovery happens afterwards. But the complex cases may go into sepsis.
And if not treated early? And if not treated early?
Well, the natural progression of the disease is pretty complex. There are some cases of resolution, but in most cases it can go to abdominal peritonitis, sepsis, and even death.
Yeah.
So that's the clinical idea that we are trying to phenotype. So we have the entire spectrum of appendicitis, from the mild disease to the more severe, life-threatening disease.
And Gowtham, you're using appendicitis, so I'm assuming there's nothing, you're not saying acute appendicitis, it's just appendicitis. Correct? There's no sub-targeting in this case.
He did say that. He said there's very rarely chronic.
Yeah, so I mean, you could press me and you could say, are you really interested in the chronic variety? And I would say, no, I'm not interested in the chronic variety. So that's an ambiguity that I recognize in my clinical description right now.
But currently, your current clinical description is including both.
As described, yes, it includes the milder forms and it includes the edge case of chronic condition. Any other questions on the appendicitis clinical idea?
Okay, so if you can walk us through the definition you submitted.
Yeah. So my definition was submitted to the OHDSI Phenotype Library, and I believe they have put it as for pending peer review. So in other words, it has not been accepted yet. So I'm going to data.odyssey.org/phenotype library. You guys can follow along with me if you want to.
No,
don't do it,
don't
because this
follow.
might be. All right. So data.odyssey.org/phenotype library, and searching for appendicitis. I'm going to talk about the cohort definition logic. So going to this cohort definition tab. So I have defined an entry event criteria. the entry event is persons who have appendicitis. This is anybody who's got appendicitis, but I'm requiring that they have that in an inpatient or an inpatient ER visit. And that inpatient and inpatient ER visit should be temporally overlapping with the diagnosis of appendicitis. I do not have any inclusion rules, and my cohort exit is basically the last date of that diagnosis +1. And that's it. Now, if a person has a second code of appendicitis within 180 days, I'm assuming that it was part of the previous appendicitis episode, and I'm just going to stitch them together into a continuous era, so that I do not double count people. So if somebody has appendicitis today and they resolve, but 2 weeks later they come back, I would assume that it is part of the same appendicitis that just did not, heal completely. And so I believe that 180 days of washout is good enough to rule out continuation of the appendicitis. In terms of my concept set expressions, here is my concept set expression. It's pretty simple. I went on and used the SNOMED hierarchy, and I went up the chain of SNOMED, selected appendicitis, the broad idea, and all its descendants. And that basically pulled a large set of concept IDs. So this is my concept set expression, appendicitis and its descendants. And when I resolve it, I got about 34 concepts, and I looked at the individual concepts. All of these are SNOMED concepts, as you know. It was the concept IDs made sense to me.
What does it
Gowtham, just
mean
go.
to make
Sorry.
sense? What's making sense and what's not making sense?
Yeah, so I'm using semantic judgment here. So I'm basically saying I have a clinical idea in my mind, and that clinical idea has some terms associated with it. And I'm doing semantical matching in my head and saying, okay, acute phlegmonous appendicitis sounds like some appendicitis with pus in it. Okay, I'm good. That's all I'm doing.
So how about Crohn disease of appendix? It doesn't have numbers, but would you put that in or out?
Exactly.
Ooh, that doesn't sound good at all.
Why
That
not?
sounds
Okay.
that sounds chronic.
Yeah, that sounds like Crohn's disease. It's not even appendicitis. Maybe it is inflammation, but I like that.
So it is in the appendix and it's an inflammation.
Mhm.
What's wrong?
Yeah, I mean it's inflammation, and I did say I want everything.
So obviously it's tongue in cheek, right? We need to try to get away from the I looked at it and it made sense, because that's where reproducibility and transparency breaks down.
Mhm.
We need to say what are these things that we are. So in my opinion, what this is we have differential diagnoses, and some of them are exclusive and some of them are inclusive. So some of the differential diagnosis you can also have at the same time, and some of them you cannot have. It's either one or the other. Okay, and you should essentially have a list and declare for each of them whether it's inclusive or exclusive. And if it's inclusive, typically you're going to say, okay, I'll bring it in, unless you want specificity. And the exclusive ones you have to kick out. And you may even later on kick them out explicitly in an exclusion criterion later on. So,
Yeah.
But this is the thing, right? We need to come to some kind of a decision tree of what it is that we're doing while staring at this list.
Exactly.
Yeah, and go ahead.
I was just saying, I mean, it depends on the specificity of cohort definition. I mean, if you're only looking for acute appendicitis, you will want to say, you want to have that zero history in your inclusion criteria to make sure you're not getting some of these codes of the other. I mean,
Well, but with your definition here, are you not, your definition is broad enough such that you're including any inflammatory disease of the appendix, Crohn's
Right.
disease of the appendix does fit within that schema.
Yeah.
But if your intentional
this is-
definition for the original cohort definition is only to do, acute or only to do chronic or be broad, I mean, kitchen sink, if you want kitchen sink, you got kitchen sink here. But,
So in Ben, and you brought a perfect point, Alexander. You're right too. So when I described the clinical idea, and when Christian clarified, I stated it's broad, it's everything from the mildest form to the most chronic form, and from semantic understanding now, Crohn's disease is an inflammatory disease, and here we're talking about appendix inflammatory disease. Is it appendicitis? It's according to the target.
So as a peer reviewer, when I look at this, again, I go back to, I'm not thinking of broad or specific, I'm thinking of the clinical description he described. His target was appendicitis, did not specify any exclusions. He just said inflammatory of the appendix. So that would, in this context, be accurate. Obviously, if he missed specifying that in his, if the flip has happened, if he called things acute appendicitis and described in the clinical idea acute appendicitis, and then I saw codes here that shows Crohn's disease of appendix, which would be related to inflammation that is not what he described, then that would be raising a flag for me. But again, the clinical description of what he described as the target is the standard I'm going after, in my opinion.
But yeah, just a thought. Should the description of the ID not be very specific on what you would like to exclude from things, or basically, in my view, the Crohn's disease or even the relapse would be, let's say, a different thing than just acute appendicitis. I mean,
But is your question diagnostic or management? Because at the end of the day,
yeah, exactly.
if you're
that's a
seeing
good question.
appendiceal inflammation from Crohn's, the management is still going to be an appendectomy.
Okay.
That's right.
But I do agree with Christian and what you just said, Sebastian. I think part of clarifying the clinical description is totally include that exclusions of clarifying what is not your target. I'm not a clinician. From working with those documents, I realized that you should really describe it by what it's not what it is, because clinicians do think in that differential diagnosis elimination kind of mindset. So many times clinical ideas are described by what it's not what it is. And maybe that exclusion should be something that we want to add to our documentation.
Yeah.
Okay, and I do want to push people away from now starting venting the definition, because now we just want to have a high level of what it is, because I think our tool give us something better than this list to look at and spend so much time on things that had zero records.
Yeah, so we could continue to spend time, like Azza said, in this data source and in the 10 data source that we have run this on. What the tool is telling me is it's leading into zero records. There is nobody with that Crohn's disease of appendix code. So even if it's to decide to remove or keep it, it's not going to make many difference. So that's one insight.
Okay, Gowtham, so it's people in this case, yeah. So it's people with this list of code. That's your definition. That's your entry criteria? Do you have any exclusions or inclusions? Can you go back?
I do not. So anybody?
You do.
I do have a rule. It's not enough that you just have the diagnosis. You have to have the diagnosis in an inpatient or an inpatient ER setting.
And to be more specific, it's just a computer, but the implementation of your code here is that if any event where any of these codes are present within overlapping with a visit, the inpatient or ER, whether it starts on the same day or start, as long as your code is present on or before the visit has ended, the event will be captured. So so in English, that code has to occur during a visit or a start or a visit or at the end of an inpatient or ER visit.
Yep. The code has to overlap with an inpatient visit.
So
Or ER.
and obviously, you know, my rant about those criteria having to justify themselves. Why would you add the hospital criteria?
Yeah. Can it
Yeah.
be GP?
What if actually, apart from the fact that it has to justify itself no matter what, but in this case, actually, they could just have taken the kid, usually, well, actually, it's not, could have been others, gone to the GP, and GP says, oh my God, we need to send you in, okay? Then you have a perfectly fine appendicitis, nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. You killed it.
So, yeah, that's absolutely correct. So that this is the dilemma that I went through. So one of the assertions that was made in the clinical description was the treatment. The treatment here, and I described that in my initial presentation. I'm going to actually highlight that. It's almost exclusively managed in the inpatient setting is something that is a word choice that I've used when I described it. So I can't find the exact word to highlight, but the reason for that was my a priori assertion that the management is exclusively in the inpatient setting.
But this is not. You can justify it by what you expect as a clinician, but let's clarify. It is not as part of your clinical. Being inpatient is not part of the clinical description. You can rationalize it based on what you expect as a clinician, but it is a decision you made in an attempt to improve your specificities. Would that be accurate? It's not, has nothing to do with the clinical disease. In theory, the disease can happen anywhere. But because you expect it to be managed in a hospital setting, so you're more likely to believe a case if it happened in a hospital setting. So you just add it to improve your specificity as a judgment you made. That's now, we as a peer reviewer, and even you as a person who evaluated, should check if this hurt you in any way, mainly did you really improve your specificity and what happened to your sensitivity. But for now, let's take this for what he did, and let's see if our tool can help us either support that decision or red flag it. But in theory, you can't say I did it because of the clinical idea. The clinical idea can happen anywhere. You expect it to happen in a hospital setting. Is that correct?
That's correct. So I expect that people with appendicitis to be managed in an inpatient or inpatient ER setting. And so I made a decision in my core definition to restrict the people to inpatient ERs.
There would be countries where people die because they don't get to an hospital.
Exactly.
That's
and there's even a use case where you're saying, how often do people die of appendicitis? And they are the ones who don't get to the hospital. So if you kill them, kick them out, all of them live. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the thing, right? We need for each criterion, we need to say this is why I put this in. So if I am Sebastian and want to do that use case, I can kick it out because I know why it's there. And what happens if I kick out that particular criterion?
But I do want to, it's not enough to say why you did it. It's more important to say how this probably affected your measurement error, which I want to get into. I do
have some numbers for those.
Yeah, exactly right. So the criterion is here to boost specificity.
Yeah, but would you then not need to add basically the actual management?
You could. You don't have to, but you could. You could say if they didn't.
Yeah, you could.
If they didn't put the patient to surgery, then it wasn't appendicitis. It was just a gastroenteritis. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. That's again. This is absolutely depending on what you. But if on the other hand you want to do some long-term, how many of them develop a diverticulitis? Okay. Of the ones who had appendicitis who were treated, yeah, then you leave it in because then you have a very clean exposure overall.
Yeah, but maybe there's also let's say in terms of the the way that we want our phenotypes to behave, there's maybe distinction between phenotypes that are about very specific treatment pathways, so to speak, versus phenotypes, cohort definitions that are about diagnoses or sets of symptoms that point to a certain diagnosis, maybe even
so this is a perfect conversation. This is exactly what we wanted to talk about. So now I'm going to take the moderator role and just introduce a few ideas. So the ideas here is, what is the target? And if you say your target is people who have been treated with surgery for appendicitis, that is a different target from you saying people who have appendicitis who decided not to go to the hospital. Yeah. It's different from the people who have appendicitis and that let chance decide the fate of their treatment. They're all different phenotypes.
Yeah, or people that are suspected of appendicitis but prove to be something else. That's also right. One. Yeah,
that's right. So now, once you have your clarified clinical idea in mind, we develop core definitions with that target in mind. And what we assess is, how are we getting this right? Like, are we off by something? We will be off by anything because we are modeling an idea. Every model is an approximation. So there will be approximation in missing people or getting the wrong set of people. Sensitivity and specificity. And that's what we are talking about, measurement error. Models measure something and we are missed by something. So once we have a target, once we have clarified the clinical idea, which is the target, we build these algorithms, and there could be more than one, which we call cohort definitions. And when those are applied, they're off from the reality by some error, sensitivity error, specificity errors, and index state misclassification. The problem with this conversation is, if you change the target itself, well, if you change the target from all appendicitis to acute appendicitis that is not treated, then we can't use the same cohort definitions. We have to start all over every time we change the target. We can't be moving the target. And that's why we start by saying, clarify the clinical idea.
Okay. So Gowtham,
I'm putting back my submitted hat now.
Okay, I will. We have a lot to cover. I don't want to keep this as a theoretical discussion. We want to see if we can use the tool to add anything into the theoretical discussion. Yes. Okay, so so far, do we all agree that the clinical idea is clear, that it's appendicitis, not restricting, not going under that, anything specific under that umbrella? This is the target. Do we agree that his clinical description clarify this? Should I give him full points for clinical description as a reviewer? It's clear and ambiguous. We understand that his cohort definition. We already have some questions or what's the right term? Some red flags for the requirement of an inpatient, because that's not necessarily that. Basically, we're thinking about missing some people that under his clinical description are covered. People who get to the GP and didn't get to the hospital. You are missing with those. In terms of measurement error, this translates into a poor sensitivity. So we have worries about the sensitivity error he might got into due to that criteria. Now, keep that in mind. Let's go through the process. Gowtham, before you go to cohort count, before you go into the tool, because I'm modeling the whole peer review process, which could include other things. So as a peer reviewer, I happen to be an OHDSI collaborator. I'm going to take the screen, Gowtham. I happen to be an OHDSI collaborator who have access to OMAP, CDMs, other databases than, well, in this case, the same databases, but anyways, but as a peer reviewer, questions?
Yeah, maybe you're now going towards, let's say, the results or basically the coverage in the concept set. Maybe is it important if you have a clinical idea You mentioned that there are different clinical settings where this is maybe treated, or but also in the description there's talk about the symptoms and the signs that are important in the diagnosis. But there's also something about pathology that can be said. Is it specifically for a specific pathology? Is it the temporal aspect, only acute, and not so much the chronic part? Is it about yeah, all kinds of things that are part of the clinical idea? How precise should the description be in order to be evaluate correctly the resulting concept set?
Yeah, that's a very good point, Sebastian, and that's something we struggle with. And I've gone down the rabbit hole of writing an entire textbook about a clinical idea, and then being told that you wrote an entire textbook. So it's a problem, and we don't know the answer to that question. And I see a hand raised here. I thought Evan was raising something. Evan, you raised your hand.
I was just going to, because I know you guys are moving on from the clinical description. I think there was a salient point raised there about things that, the things that are on your differential diagnosis. And I guess that, the ultimate question is, some of them you might actually want to explicitly state whether or not you want to exclude them or not. And the point was raised there about Crohn's, and completely accept that there's, basically no hits under Crohn's appendicitis. But what we don't know is whether or not there might be a Crohn's disease kind of diagnosed on the same admission, because they went for the appendix and actually it wasn't the appendicitis, it was the first presentation of Crohn's. Exactly. Right. So that that might be something that we would kind of add into the clinical description in terms of like things that we might actually want to exclude that were on that list. I just wanted to kind of comment on that before we went off of the clinical description.
I think part of the peer review is even improving the clinical description. Like you can have that discussion and say, listen, you have to, and that's what I meant by documentation. Like part of the peer review is to make sure that the documentation is clear for a user, as Christian was alluding into, like describe the rationale behind every exclusion criteria. But I think also modifying the clinical description to, if needed, just to clarification, just in the same way we do to published papers, right? Sometimes you agree with the literature, what the researcher has done, but you request that a certain point in your methodology is better clarified, so readers can understood better. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do as a peer reviewer, so he gave me a list of codes that he decided represent the entry event, in this case, diagnosis of appendicitis. So one thing that we all concerned about, did he miss any codes? Did he, is that entry criteria he's missing under the diagnosis of appendicitis that he didn't include because of the way he did his work? He should have done this as an when he did his evaluation, but as a peer reviewer, I can quickly check if there's anything missed. So our tool allows us to do something like ORFER concepts, which given the concept set that he included, is there anything that is semantically close in the vocabulary that he could have missed? Better of this orphan ability in cohort diagnostic is what now we have in Atlas, which is Phoebe 0.2, thanks to Anna. So I can bring, on the call, I can bring, which now we have in Janssen, now we have Phoebe in our Atlas. So as a peer reviewer, I can actually take his definition, this is his concept set, and push in something called recommended, which in that case is Phoebe 0.2. If you haven't talked to Patrick or Anna lately, you should, because that's their new invention. So what is this doing is taking the concept sets of all that were included and then looking at basically recommending codes that he have missed. This is something somebody should do while developing their definition, but as a peer reviewer, I'm just making sure that they did this and there's nothing, they didn't miss anything. So so I'm looking at the recommendation system in this case. What the Phoebe is doing is that it's recommending codes for me based on that appendicitis codes list, which should either close because of semantic and lexical relationship. So here I see it's recommending something like infection, Crohn's disease, disorder of appendix. So these are the things. So we can look at them and say, okay, did he miss anything that is close to his clinical description, but he missed just semantically. So I see here disorder of appendix. Okay, Yeah, that might be. And then here is rupture of appendix.
Yeah,
And that is a huge, not huge, but that is a good count. And then that is something I could look at. So take a note that we have rupture of appendix. Now, based on his clinical description, this should qualify unless it's not caused by inflammation. Question for the clinicians here.
And depending on your phenotype.
So
yeah,
it could
it could be a manifestation of the appendicitis.
exactly, or
but could
advanced stage of the disease.
Yeah.
Right? So now you have now the baby is down into the appendix is good.
So this is just a rubric I put for myself, so we don't forget. Okay. Okay.
I think Anna tried to say something.
Yeah, she's trying to.
Yeah. Well, my problem with this conversation so far, and that relates to your comments on whether rupture is related or not, is that you're making those assumptions that people can manifest with the symptoms, or we can miss other people, or we can include people we don't want to. But the problem is that we don't really know if including any of the codes will lead to any change in the patient composition. And we can only learn that when we do some sort of evaluation, be it qualitative assessment of patient characteristics, of p-evaluator, or something else. So while I find this conversation very useful, it's like we just should test it, and I think we will get to it later on as I will show.
Absolutely, Anna. So I'm functioning now as a peer reviewer, not as person who's trying to improve the definition. So my first observation is that there's a code that sounds semantically and clinically related. Whether I'm not saying it needs to be included, that is totally something needs to be tested. But I, as a reviewer, I just saw something that clinically and semantically sounds that might be a miss. So absolutely, if I was developing the cohort, I would do what you said. Like, we have to test if that is something need to be included or not, based on maybe some observation from the data. So I took that note. There is something else. There are 4 codes here recommended by Phoebe because of patient context. So those are codes related. They are recommended because or based on co-similarity score. So what that says is that people who have this code in the data have a similar distribution of covariates to the people who are have the codes given to the machine here. To like people who have appendicitis, based on the code list I give, have a similar distribution of covariates to people who have disorder of appendix, abdominal abscess, appendicular concertin, and so forth. So this is purely empirically, it's telling me people look similar, you might want to include these codes. Again, this is a clinical judgment. I already know from the data that those people look the same. So the composition, as Anna has just said, is probably going to be similar because it's already recommended, but it's a clinical judgment as a reviewer to say, you should look at this code. Any clinical input on these codes? Anybody think it's worth looking at?
I do not know what appendicular concretion is.
A quick search seems to suggest that that's a fecalith.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's out of scope. Out of scope.
It depends on the use case.
Yeah.
No, Christian.
We'll
Depends on the definition of appendicitis here. Inflammation of the appendix.
So you could have a appendicitis secondary to a fecalith, but in this use case, you don't care about a fecalith independent of appendicitis. So including that would not have any clinical use.
Fine.
Right?
Yeah.
Can I have a question on the peer review in this case? I would say what I noted in the concept set of, or whatever was what the concepts that are in the phenotype as in the core definition as it is. There was I think abscess in the appendices of in the appendix, and my thinking is that it's not really should not included in the clinical idea of appendicitis. What happens if you leave that out of the concept, exclude it, and then do Phoebe 2.0? So maybe the order of doing this recommendation is first look at the prune, basically the concept set, and then do the Phoebe, or yeah, what?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is another thing we look at, but I personally, because I kind of get overwhelmed if that included concept set have hundreds, sometimes thousands of codes. I can't look at every code that it's also useless. So I like to take an easier approach in which I look Cohort Diagnostic, give you index event breakdown, and what that means from all these it gives me the breakdown of all these the distribution of all the concepts in the included list, how it manifests in the data. In this case, I can look at those that played a role in the inclusion of people. So if there's a code that has no people or did not, was not a cause for somebody to come in, I don't have to dwell too much about include it or not. Or if there's something that, or here I can look if there's something that is not consistent with the clinical idea. Was there any code semantically not covered under the umbrella of appendicitis or something else? And I have all the data sets here that I have access to, and also that's all in the OHDSI Phenotype library. So this all diagnostics, everybody can see it. So I can pick a database here. I can either see them both in standard and non-standard concept, or I can start by limiting myself to standard just to see how it looks from SNOMED perspective. Okay, so I see that the big hitter here, which is accounting for at least 70 to 80% of the people in the group, in the cohort, is acute appendicitis. So that makes me feel good because like everybody's thinking of acute appendicitis being the big hitter, and that's consistent with the data. Acute appendicitis, which is in the clinical description is described as the main manifestation, does seem to be what is playing down in the data. So that as a peer reviewer, that makes me feel good from a specificity perspective. There's this code of appendicitis, which is non-specific, seems good. And then there's acute appendicitis with general priorities, all this. Oops, sorry.
Yeah.
Here's the abscess.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's also acute appendicitis with abscess, so that could also be the reason for Phoebe to recommend the other thing. Yeah. So it would not solve it. No.
Yeah, and it's this one is legit, right? Because it's
exactly
acute appendicitis.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Have been working with the beautiful OMAP data model and standard vocabulary. Many times we make mistakes just because of things now map very nicely, but sometimes some of the mappings are not good. So it makes sense to look at in this case it makes sense to look at non-standard code to make sure that there's nothing that is out of scope that is mapped to a higher concept SNOMED that is in scope, and you're including something that you don't want just because of the mapping. So here I can look at.
As a time check, we have 1 hour through, we have half an hour left.
Oh my goodness, okay. So I can look at standard code, I can look at read, I can just make sure that I covered, hold on, I'm in the wrong place. I can cover, it's not here.
Just a reminder, we're doing peer review, we're not teaching.
Okay, yeah, I'm not, yeah, but so quickly, everything looks fine in terms of these concepts are under the umbrella of the clinical description, the submitter provided. There's nothing that is false positives. Everybody agree? Okay. So now I check the entry criteria. I have identified a code that has been missed. I can now, I'm not going to spend time on this because you can, if I'm always worried about what others have done, and make sure that, just look at the literature and pick one of those definitions instead of creating your own. Here, this is a paper that validated a definition for appendicitis. And they found that their PPV was 83 and their, that's it. They just give me PPV, right?
Now, just
Okay.
full disclaimer, I have not done a literature search, and I've not declared that I've done literature search on the Odyssey forum post. So Aza is an expert in this field, and so she knows what others have done.
Okay, so I have two papers that actually phenotype appendicitis in observational data, and they did chart reviews or adjudication, and they provide sensitivity and specificity estimate of almost perfect work. So this is a phenotype that they claim to be perfect. So I can just check what did they do. So here, the person who does the literature review for us, give us the codes and give us what's the inclusion criteria. So in this case, they used ICD-10 of K35, K36, and K37. And they said the diagnosis of appendicitis or inflamed appendix. That was their entry criteria. So that sounds slightly different than what Gowtham has done. I'm not sure. I can go back to the index event and see if he included K35, K36, and K37. There's another paper here that did ICD-10, no, ICD-9, 540.9, or ICD-10, K35.1, 35.9. So this one went more specific and did appendicitis, acute appendicitis, or perforated appendicitis, and included those codes.
And as I want to confirm that the definition includes K35, K36, K37.
Good. And I assume K35.1 is already there because that's a maps to it in the hierarchy. K35.9.
K35.9, I'm going to check. What I'm doing is I'm actually running on the tool to check. K35.9. I do not see K35.9 in my definition. I see K35.8. I see all other K35, but I do not see K35.9.
So K35.9 looks like it would map back to one of the disorders of appendix, I suspect.
Potentially, I am looking at the vocabulary right now. So as in the ICD-10 CM, K35.9 is called acute appendicitis unspecified, and I see it's an ICD-10 and not an ICD-10 CM.
I don't have
okay.
K35.9 in my ICD-10 library. Unspecified acute appendicitis is K35.8.
That's interesting. So maybe this is there is K35.9 there.
Oh, it's a CN. Sorry, I'm looking at CM.
Okay, never mind. This is ICD-10. That's why we couldn't find it. You have it already because you have the ICD-10 CM correspondence to it, Gowtham.
Oh,
and
so this is a CM.
Look.
This is not a CM, and I was looking at a US data source.
Yeah.
In when I flipped from US data source to not European data source in the tool, I'm still not seeing it. Maybe it's just which data source was that validated on?
Don't worry. Go to okay. I can check for you here. I'm pretty sure it's N because you have those verbal. Okay. So if we go here, I'm going to go back to the definition. I'm looking in Atlas, if Atlas corresponds faster.
The 10 data sources that are 11 data sources that are on data.odyssey.org Phenotype Library does not have K35.9 mapped, but it looks like the concept set expression would capture that.
Here it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the
So it's included in it.
The concept set expression would include K35.9, but the 11 data sources that I ran on it, and that data source did not have K35.9. So that's why the tool data.odyssey.org Phenotype Library does not show K35.9 because none of the data sources had K35.9. But the vocabulary does map to it.
But it's in your included list. So okay. So So yeah, so and that's how we do. We also, our life is very easy because we have somebody who extract the codes for us and tell us. But I did look at this ahead of time, and Gowtham did not miss any of the codes recommended in the validated phenotypes from the literature.
As one more comment you could make is, if you look at the other requirement column G,
yeah,
the majority of them.
Okay, so this is just how much the literature is flawed. So here's a definition that did require hospitalization, and in their adjudication they had their PPV of 83%. This is one that did not require hospitalization, and their specificity, okay, they don't have, do they, and their, okay, got it. And their PPV is 0.76, so it did look like it went down. So this did not require hospitalization, reported a very high sensitivity, very good specificity, has a PPV of 0.7. This required a hospitalization, cannot report sensitivity, but reported a PPV of 83%. So if this is the truth, Gowtham definition should be in the bulk of 83% PPV, but we have no idea of how bad his sensitivity is, at least from prior work. I think those are the only two validated studies. And you can, if you quickly look at those papers, most of them did indeed require hospitalization. Here's an ED visit. This one did not. Hospital, inpatient, discharge, which means it's a hospital, inpatient, primary diagnosis, inpatient, hospital. So other researchers have thought if only requiring hospital, of only including hospitalized cases. The one that did has a PPV of 83%. The one that did not has a sensitivity of 0.9 and a PPV of 0.7. That just gives you what others have done. Okay. So now we know that we're not really missing codes other than the one recommended by Phoebe, which maybe we want to report back to the submitter, consistent with other have done in the past. The index event breakdown looks good. So he already required a hospitalization. So 100% of the people will either be in an ER setting or an inpatient setting. But now, given I'm worried about the sensitivity, I can quickly check the counts, see how much did he lose by requiring that hospitalization.
So just very quickly, in this submitted, because the way the definition was structured, you may not see it.
I can't see it as an inclusion criteria.
But I have another definition which I can grab the screen and show it. So I created this because I knew you were going to go there. So I'm going to quickly share the screen and then you can take the screen back. So okay. Here is
so just for people who are not familiar with our tools. The way Gowtham configured the definition is that he required an inpatient, outpatient as a restriction on the initial event, not as an inclusion criteria. So none of our tools give us the attrition.
Yeah, so I have the same definition implemented in a different tool, but here instead of the definition being part, I just changed the order in which the rules were applied so that I can actually get the breakdown. So I'm going to show you where that is. And so I have 1 and 2, and I'm going to restrict it to the data sources that have inpatient. Okay, so notice here, I'm going to just restrict to persons for clarity. So there are two definitions here. This is different from this is a different tool, different URL. You don't have access to this, but this is something that I used as part of the development process. So here there are two definitions. One is identical to the definition that Aza is reviewing, and here I have actually created in such a way that I can identify how many people have lost because of the restriction to the inpatient setting. Everything else is identical. The reason why the submitted definition has the inclusion of the requirement for inpatient in a different way is because that just runs faster. It's just more optimum in terms of compute time. But Aza, to answer your question, we are losing a good chunk, like almost 50 to 60, sometimes even 80% of the people I'm sorry, the other way around. We're losing 40, 50, 50, 30, 40, and 20% of the people who enter by the rule.
Okay, so in Medicare, I only lost 20%. Oh, hold on.
Sorry, you're looking at my screen.
You went quickly over it. Okay, so because people were concerned about the inpatient. So this is the remain, right? This is the remain. Okay, so in Medicare, I lost less than 20%, which it makes sense that appendicitis most likely to happen in a hospital, but I already see that it is not in Optimi HR. I have 50%, about 50%. I lost about 50% of the events. In JMDC, I lost also close to 50%. In Phimetric, I lost close to 40%. So I lost somewhere between 50% to 16% across these databases. Some of them might be true cases. So in the what that tells me in terms of measurement error, in the extreme scenario, all these cases are true, and my sensitivity got hit somewhere between 14% to about 50%. In the situation that all these cases are true negatives, then these numbers will be fine. But there is a potential that I have lost 50% of true cases. Evan.
And this is a place to point out this might also relate to some of the visit table abnormalities we saw in some other in acute pancreatitis, for example, where it looks like a lot of ED visits are actually have visit occurrence IDs of outpatient visit, and then are often accompanied by something in the procedure domain table with a CPT4 code for ED visit. That was just something that we kind of observed when we were going through those cases.
Yeah, so this is we're going about the submission. So I've evaluated those. There is an impact, but it is nominal, like 5%.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So that's what I'm showing.
Thank.
Can you guys hear Alsa?
Sorry, I was muted. Let me ask a question for the people on the call. You did mention we are worried about losing people who did not come to the hospital or an ER. Did we expect that that across these data sources, among all the people who have an appendicitis, 50% of them will not end up in a hospital? What do you think of that 50% to 14% number?
So one thought would be that it's a rule out situation, right? That they had a presentation, they did a scan, didn't show appendicitis. That might be one thing that they don't get admitted because they don't actually have significant pathology there, and then they're discharged. So that wouldn't necessarily kind of get registered as a inpatient visit if there is an issue in terms of capturing ED visits. I'm still not entirely following you there, Gowtham, because I feel like if that problem was there in one phenotype, it's probably there in those data sources across phenotypes, right? Where the ED visit isn't getting coded as an ED visit.
Yeah. So we use the same.
One thought. Go ahead.
Yeah. So your comment, Evan, is not clinical, but more about data capture, and you're saying that there are people who are truly having appendicitis, are receiving care in a hospital setting, but our data source is not capturing them under the visit of inpatient or ER. Correct?
It's more specific to just the ER, because I guess there's two things here I'd wonder about. One is the rule out situation where they hit an ER, it's ruled out, and they go home. So they don't get admitted. And because of the problem is kind of more restricted to the ER setting, where some of those visits are encoded as outpatient visits. The second one would be there is, the potential to just give these people antibiotics if they're candidates. I don't know how much they're sent home with them, to be totally honest, but it is one way you could look at potentially treating appendicitis in people who look like they don't have significant any abscess or tons of inflammation there, you can try a trial of antibiotics. And so maybe some of those people are going home.
Most of the
going into,
antibiotics,
the hospital.
Most of the antibiotic studies did include some sort of upfront IV load of antibiotics, at least.
Yeah.
How does
Yeah.
this?
But maybe that would happen without an admission.
Yeah.
I guess the focus of the problem is that if our ED visits aren't captured as such in our visit table, then that might confuse, that might make this a bit challenging to interpret in terms of outpatient visits that are
How would
appendicitis.
something like a 23-hour stay be handled?
Sorry, what was the comment, Alexander?
Something like I'm very unfamiliar with how Atlas handles this. I apologize, but something like a 23-hour stay under Medicare may not fall under an inpatient admission and may qualify as ED observation instead. Is that something that could be tripping it up? To your point, Evan?
I don't know. I mean, I guess it really comes down to the data source, and if that, and then I'm Canadian, so I don't know exactly how the restrictions on Medicaid would kind of play out in the data source, but that would make sense, right? If they wanted to keep it under 24 hours, they didn't get an inpatient code, then maybe that would be another. It's kind of similar to the situations we were talking about, where people don't get the admission but might get either some treatment or get a rule out kind of process.
So now, putting on my moderator hat, I'm going to propose that the peer reviewer would say, revise the definition, expand this rule, because you have a 40% attrition. That's too much. Although I've seen that others use it, your definition of inpatient is not good. So revise the definition, expand the scope of inpatient to include ER, and maybe even look for.
Well, Gowtham, ER is in.
Yeah.
Yes, ER is in this definition, but he's basically making the assertion, or the peer reviewers are making the assertion, that there are people in your data source who may be actually receiving care patterns that is consistent with inpatient or ER, but your rule is not is kicking them out.
You're talking about the vocabulary thing, the visit thing, yeah.
So what we could do as part of a rebuttal is I could build those discordant data cohorts and say, I'm going to, as a response, I'm going to extract the persons who have that inpatient-like care setting, but do not have the inpatient code, and see if their care patterns are similar to the people who have inpatient. In other words, antibiotic utilization, surgical care, and so on and so forth. Okay.
There is no way, all what we can tell now from a revision, that we are losing up to 50% of the people. In some databases, only 15. That in theory, those people could be true cases, but I don't think anybody expected that from all the people who have appendicitis and show up to the doctors, only 50% end up in the hospital. I think that number is expected to be higher. I understand that some people don't end up in the hospital, but did we expect that true cases, 50% of them are sent home without going to the hospital? Question to the clinician. So we understand how much the possible. Okay, no. So some of these cases, so removing the requirement of, imagine this on the other side, removing the requirement in a hospital means that we're going to pump up our number to almost double the numbers, which now we do have from clinical perspective, worry now about specificity, because we don't believe that 50% of the people who show up into a doctor don't end up in the hospital. But we still have a concern that we are missing cases because of that hospital requirement. So that needs to be evaluated. With the material Gowtham sent, he doesn't have that evaluation because he doesn't have anything about those people who are not showing up in a hospital. We don't have any characterization on them, so we can't tell if they're true cases or not. But that is the recommendation we're gonna send back. Evaluate who are these patients and why do they have those appendicitis codes, but don't show up in a hospital.
Didn't the original diagnosis include ER?
It did. So Andrea, the comment here is, and this is a assertion, that there are people who the data is not classifying as inpatient or ER, but seem to have procedures and care settings, care patterns that are consistent with inpatient or ER.
I mean, if we take away the requirement for emergency or inpatient care, then you're going to be including all follow-up care for appendicitis. And then this is no longer a definition of acute appendicitis. This is a definition of all patients who have had an appendicitis diagnosis. And so if we're trying to phenotype the acute event, I'm comfortable with losing a large chunk of the population, knowing that many people who have surgery follow up.
Absolutely. So yeah, so that's another clinical perception perspective is you have 50% because people show up again within that 180 days with a code for a follow-up visit, not because they just have the event. So we have, yeah, I have a question here.
Yeah, this is T. So just a comment on GMDC. So I don't know who did your GMDC conversion, but here the status, we actually have conducted a pretty thorough review of the ETL. And one thing we noticed is that the visit, all the rules related to visit table, there's one specific thing that one big category that they're missing is essentially the place of services. You can't simply rely on the care site code. You actually have to rely also on the procedure or GMDC procedure codes. So if your ETL didn't consider that, then you're going to miss a lot of ER visits in GMDC.
Very good comment.
So that's why I think revising the definition to not only include ED as a visit, but also that's what Evan was talking about, but include people who have a procedures that are inpatient or ER procedures. Is that right, Gowtham?
Yes. So as part of the peer review, so I would like to ask a volunteer to capture these ideas. I'm going to give a crude note, but somebody please, if you would volunteer now to make a forum post response as a peer reviewer with these requests. Any volunteers, please?
I can do it. Are you talking? I mean, it looks like Az is already written down a bunch.
Not you, Evan.
But I can. What's that?
It's okay, Gowtham. I can do it. It's fine. For this time, let's just do it. It's fine. Okay. So we discussed the inpatient. One perception. We know how much the potential loss. We have a justification. One adjustment is definitely include allow people to come in even if they don't have a visit, but they have a procedure that indicate that they were in an ER or inpatient setting. That will probably increase those numbers by a little bit. Okay. Who has the screen now?
I do.
You or me? You do. Okay. No, I want to actually now it's your turn. So the other thing we can look at from Cohort Diagnostics is the cohort characterization. And Gowtham, you summarized your observation of the cohort characterization from Atlas. So a brief note, what we look at is the basically clinical profile of the people who we are capturing in the data using that definition. So what are the distribution of events that we observe? So from a clinical perspective, we observe to see that in addition to the appendicitis, we observe to see some treatments, we observe to see some diagnostics, if that is possible. We expect to observe some symptoms. High rates of these events can tell me something about the specificity that the cases I'm detecting are true cases. Low distribution of these events can maybe suggest false positives in these people, and so forth. So what did you see, Gowtham?
So I've gone through the diagnostics of Cohort Diagnostics. As my first step, after looking at the cohort counts and the inclusion rules, I went to the diagnostic called incident rate. In the incident rate, I observed that there was a difference in the rate with the age and gender stratification, and I've called that out. I found that the individuals in the 10 to 30 age deciles had a higher rates of appendicitis compared to the rest of the age deciles. And the evidence for that is on data.odyssey.org, but for some reason that has a bug. So I'm going to replicate the app in my local environment, and I'm showing that to you. So here you can see there is a higher rates in certain age data. This is the 10 to 19 and 20 to 29. And then as you go older, the rate of appendicitis goes down. This is consistent with my expectations that the appendicitis is more likely in the age group demographic of 10 to 30 years. That was prior stated based on my literature understanding. So I feel like I have good capture based on years.
Gowtham, and that does suggest that we are not capturing follow-up cases, right? Because we don't see higher rate among, it's not like we're picking people who had appendicitis in their back when they were kids. Not that we have that much follow-up, but the fact that we have higher rate among kids tell us that we are capturing acute cases that just happened.
Yeah, it allays my anxiety that this is a problem list carry forward. I don't think these are true events. Maybe it is a follow-up care event, but it is an event, not a problem list carry forward. So the next thing that I observed was
Hold
the
on.
index.
Any comment on the incidence rate? Can you go back, Gowtham, to the incidence rate? So we're just looking at the
You can
rate
also
by.
notice there's a slight higher rate in the males compared to the females. Males has the bluish line and the females are the orange-ish lines.
In the 10 to 19 mainly.
Yes.
But do we agree that this is consistent with at least the demographic breakdown of what we expect for appendicitis, age and gender? Everybody, anything that, okay, good. So that is consistent.
So that made me feel like the persons that are being captured are consistent with the clinical idea. The other observation that I wanted to call out was in the index event breakdown. Although my clinical idea was people who could have any form of appendicitis, almost everybody that we were capturing, almost 80%, entered through the code of acute appendicitis. So I'm beginning to believe that this phenotype is weighted over acute appendicitis and also is consistent with my clinical assertion that majority of appendicitis is acute appendicitis.
Yes, we covered this.
The next one I found some people with had appendicitis with peritonitis and also peritoneal abscesses. These are complications and they had lower in count. In terms of visit context, the big number had simultaneous ER visit, which was also consistent with my expectations. I think the main insight that I wanted to share is the findings that I had in characterization reports. So when I went to go to cohort characterization and I select appendicitis, and I select the data sources that I'm interested in. And I select the day 0 and I run a report on it.
So looking at the distribution of all the concept in the data on that day 0, the day we got, you should have added the 30 days before and after. You're already reporting in your report that about 30 to 50% of the people had pain. So we observed some symptoms. Yes. And then there's a big proportion having abdominal pain in specific, right?
So that's right. So in most data sources, I've observed right to lower quadrant pain to be present on the day off, which is consistent with the symptoms and signs of acute appendicitis. So 34% of the people having a diagnosis code that says right lower quadrant pain. Another 16% have abdominal pain. There is about 10% to 15% nausea and vomiting, leukocytosis, abdominal abscesses. These types of clinical profiles seems to fit with what I expect in acute appendicitis. In terms of
stay on the screen. Oh, sorry. I wanted to allow people to look at that data and see if that's what they expect. Any concerns?
What excited me when I observed this was that the top sorted by natural order of frequency, where covariates that I expect with acute appendicitis, instead of like chemotherapy or diabetes medicines and so on. In terms of the management, I find that 66% have anesthesia, administration of anesthesia, laparoscopic surgery, CT of the abdomen. All the top 10 covariates, natural order of sort in the claims data and the other data sources seems to be consistent with care patterns for appendicitis. Again, reinforcing my notion that these people have acute appendicitis.
Among people who get appendectomy, what is the proportion of people who does this because of appendicitis? Clinically, like what would?
Should be like 99, right?
Yeah.
So why? So
Yeah.
why don't we? Why is appendectomy not an entry criteria? So if somebody had appendectomy, isn't that an evidence that they had appendicitis? And
Because you
isn't
could have you could have
Yeah.
antibiotic management only.
No, I agree.
Well,
I'm
and you
not
can
saying you
occasionally
to
have your appendix removed because someone's already in there doing something.
True. Yeah.
Yeah, like an
But-
incidental during a hemicolectomy or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, when the classic example is cholecystectomy, why not just remove the appendix? Something like that.
That's true.
So you guys don't believe that we can increase the sensitivity a little bit by allowing people to enter for like having an entry criteria that is only appendectomy without requiring a code, you think will bring us false positives?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think Andrew's right.
Okay.
You may get some false positives, but then you also lower your sensitivity for non-surgically
No.
managed.
No, I'm not saying.
Oh, not an and criteria, an or
Yeah, it's an
criteria.
or.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
people with the code or people with the procedure. But Gautam, I would, as part of the development, I think that is a cohort that you should. I understand that clinically you might pick up false positives, but I think it would be value. It would be of value to evaluate that option and see if the clinical profile of these people fit appendicitis. If anything, we can look at the overlap between the two populations and see if we see.
Yeah. So I mean, are you guys recommending or not recommending? I could do an experiment to say what are the people the profile of people who are identified who have appendicectomy but do not have appendicitis at the same time. The code of appendicitis, and we can see if those two populations, people who have appendicectomy and the code appendicitis, people who have appendicectomy and do not have the code of appendicitis, and if they are discordant or not.
Sure. Do we also have, in addition to ER inpatient as visit types, do we also have visit types for surgery and anesthesia in the data sets? Because these are two other types of encounters that probably have high correlation with appendicitis treatment.
No, we will have surgery as a procedure on its own, but you're not going to see it reflected in the visit type, right, Gautam?
Yeah, so it is possible that some people would have anesthesia procedures and appendicectomy procedure codes, but not be part of the visit equals inpatient or visit equals to ER, and that's an ETL challenge.
Okay.
Okay, so it is now time. We had slotted for 1.5 hours. In terms of the coverage of the peer review post, we have now covered all the content that I posted. So I posted these ideas here. These are the things that I've observed. There was hypovolemia, nausea, vomiting, leukocytosis, fever, sepsis, constipation, acute abdomen peritonitis. The procedures did have CT scan, laparoscopy, anesthesia administration, and there was drug administration. I don't think I showed the drug administration, but I will show it to you quickly. If you look at the drug administration, there is anti-nausea medication, fentanyl, midazolam, drugs, fluids, pain medications, and so on, and antibiotics, again, consistent with appendicitis. And that's the assertion that the statements that I made as part of my presentation. So one of the items that we wanted to present was the output of fee evaluator. So I'll get that. Could not get that.
There is something, maybe do you have the results of fee evaluator?
I do not.
Okay. Can you go back and just quickly show us the distribution in the -30 days?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I'm after the same thing, Azza, because we haven't really talked a whole lot about the index date misclassification. And that actually was my biggest concern about this phenotype.
Are you sharing your screen?
Oh, can you guys see my screen?
Oh, no,
It looks like it's slowly working.
Yeah, it's right. It takes a time for it load from memory, load from database.
Somebody,
it's a
yeah.
no. OHDSI does not have a lot of money, so it doesn't have a lot of big infrastructure to get pulled down instantaneously.
Yes, I think now we're going to look at the proportion of appendectomy that happened before index, and that can give us an idea of how bad we are in index date.
All right, so let's see. I'm going to do 1 day. No, -30 day. All right. So appendicectomy, laparoscopic appendicectomy, we see about 2 to maybe 6% in the -1 to -30 days. Now, this is the -1 to -30 days before. I would assume that most of these are going to be -1 or -2 days. It's not going to be -30, but that's just the default window of -1 to -30. So based on that assumption, I would say about 3 to 5 to 6% of the people have an index date misclassification.
Basically, they had the procedure before they had the code of the diagnosis.
Correct. Now, I would expect the antibiotics to be actually much more higher because you could start the person with an antibiotic. Like here, we see on Desetron, which is much higher. So it's given for nausea. There is fluids being given much more higher. So I would say based on treatment, the index date misclassification could be 12 to 12%.
Can you look at condition abdominal pain? All codes of pain.
Yeah, so again, in the -30 day window, we have about 10% to 12%, right lower quadrant pain in the index date. So there is definitely index date misclassification, at least 10%.
Those acute appendicitis you're observing, those are the ones that you washed out. Yeah.
With the outpatient visit restriction, you think?
So these could have been in the outpatient and then subsequently got admitted the next day.
Yeah,
and that's
or
the source.
the ED problem. Yeah.
That's the source of index event. So if somebody currently, if somebody showed up in a GP and then went to the hospital, we are only detecting that time they went to the hospital where the event could have happened a day ago. Yeah, so a potential adjustment modification would be indexing on either the code or appendectomy or the code any place or appendectomy or any of those specific symptoms like abdominal pain, and then requiring a code that occur within 5 days or something. This way, we know we're indexing on the event. Especially in a hospital, when you require an inpatient visit, you must at least make sure that you're detecting the case if somebody showed up in the GP ahead of time.
So 2 questions for you guys as you think through this. We're all making decisions together now. So if you do an indexed misclassification correction, we can now index on diagnosis, treatment, or procedure. But obviously, as we know, these people were not admitted on that day. So if we say they also need admission on that day, that's not going to happen. They're not going to satisfy that criteria. They got admitted 2 days later. Maybe they just got watched for 2 days. We don't know. So in that case, you will have to allow for them to be admitted some days after. So if some person gets admitted 2 days after, that should also be acceptable. So we have to give a margin, and that's a judgment here. There is no right or wrong number, and we don't have diagnostics for it. It's not. So 2 days, 3 days, 1 day. What's the offset, you think?
I don't think that surgeons feel very comfortable with letting acute appendicitis sit in the ED that long. So I'd feel like we're starting to induce errors if we allowed more than a day sitting in the emergency department. I mean, that might have happened during the pandemic, but surgeons get pretty twitchy.
Perfectly agree. I would.
You can also, there just a thought. So you can also relax that window, but when you search for the admissions, subsequent admission, you require a presence of appendicitis diagnosis in that admission.
Yeah, you can totally do that. Yeah, that's a good idea. So you can relax it, but it's still on that day you expect the diagnosis to still show up on the admission. So yeah.
Right.
Be interesting to take a look and see what we see in terms of imaging too, like when the imaging's done.
I thought it's ultrasound, no?
You could mostly CT, I think. Ultrasound is
Yeah.
also possible. You can see 30%.
Ultrasound will give you a fast diagnosis, but most surgeons will, that I know of at least, won't operate without CT.
And the use of, in this particular data source, in all these data sources, actually, we are seeing that the computerized tomography is much more higher than ultrasound. So you see 13%, and we're actually looking at in the minus 30-day window. So if I restrict to this, there is 57% and 78%. And Evan, as you know, these are all concept ID level. These are not grouped. So this is an underestimate of the actual.
Yeah, you can add them up technically because they are,
but again,
unless they overlap.
It was similar in that there was about a 10% misclassification based on when the CT was done, which is usually, I mean, this is definitely a clinical diagnosis, but I don't think in the modern era any surgeon operates without the imaging now. It used to be that they would take them. That was before my time, I think. But I guess it also kind of raises I still think that if they're getting this code and then it's CT, and I don't know, part of this is like, I work in Canadian healthcare. It's hard to get in to see your GP, and then definitely hard to get the CT the same day. But that starts to really kind of make the case that I think these are ED visits that are outpatient, that are being counted as outpatient visits. Because when you start kind of piling on all the things that you get in an ED, all happening in that visit. But maybe in the States, you go see your GP, you call them, you go there that day, they get you a CT that day, everything's all dealt with. But I don't know.
I think usually if I saw a patient in clinic and was suspected acute appendicitis, I'd probably just send them to the emergency department.
Exactly. You're not going to get the imaging yourself.
No.
Yeah.
No, I don't think it's all the minus 30. I don't only think it's because of those GP. I think we're picking up the codes on the discharge note. I believe like the event maybe truly happened ahead of time, and we're not capturing that, and we're capturing the diagnosis that came on the discharge, and that's why it's off.
Fair enough. But even by diagnosis, we were seeing about a 10% misclassification. Like the diagnosis came before, right? So those are diagnoses that are attached to outpatient encounters. And I guess what I'm suggesting is that I think those outpatient encounters, a good chunk of them are actually ED encounters.
Yeah. I think that's a fair comment, Evan, and those we definitely need to test it. Okay, so I've captured the peer review notes as the following. So first of all, in the clinical description, clarify if acute versus chronic or all. I think we can say we want to do acute. Maybe I want to clarify the clinical description. Acute, no.
No, then
Okay.
you're gonna go, no, I think,
Okay,
because
that'll
then you
change the
have to
target,
pick
right?
and choose, because now you're gonna go to the 70 to 80% and maybe 20% is actually not acute. I think this definition works for all appendicitis. We expect that the majority by nature to be acute because that's anyways what we observe for clinical care and what's expected in the clinical description. So
Okay.
I think you
So
leave it
no
as
changes
is.
to clinical description. Keep it as is. The target is the same. Target is unambiguous. We are clarifying. Okay, this is good. So the question about why inpatient, that has been clarified. Most literature, peer-reviewed literature shows use inpatient. But what we're observing is we have a huge attrition. So we do an empirical test to figure out the attrition. So I'm going to move that comment here.
And then
So
as it relates to that, that's not something, as it relates to that, there is a potential sensitivity measurement error because of that requirement.
yes.
We can't really quantify it. Well, we can see what fee evaluator says, but in theory, there is definitely, because there is a potential that those 50% of the people in Medicaid contain people who truly have the event and didn't end up in the hospital, as Kristen and Alexander, I think, started this discussion. We don't believe it's 50%. That's why I won't recommend removing that requirement, because as Andrea said, we're going to end up getting all those follow-up visits. But we have to acknowledge that there's a potential sensitivity error in this definition. There is probably some proportion of these people that truly have the event that we're not capturing because they never went to the hospital.
Okay, so because we are over time, I would like to conclude this session. And obviously we all have lives to continue on. But after concluding the peer review session, I just want to talk to you all to think about how did this go? Any feedback? How can we continue this? Is this even feasible to do? This is a lot of time and energy. I can stop the
We've
recording.
chatted, so I want to kind of push others to. I want other feedback of others because we get to talk all the time.
Well, I've talked also, but maybe one thing is I think it's really useful discussion and also improving the quality of the phenotype in the end. I think the problem is also a little bit on how to document. Now, basically, how to make the corrections that you want. That's one thing, and then how to document what you did. That's also something that we need to solve probably in order to have some harmonization there, that we know what it means when this is approved or after past peer review or whatever you call it. Yeah, and then in the end, with Christian in mind, it will be useful for certain use cases and maybe not for all. Maybe something like that is also needed there. But that's, yeah, so there's a lot more work to do, but especially in the documentation of what the results are for this discussion.
Yeah, I would echo that. It's the first time I joined this meeting. It's very productive and reminds me of the Pioneer study found the exercise we went through there. We had very similar engagements to with clinicians, with data scientists, with our phenotyping experts to go through all these detailed definitions into both concept sets, also as well as the cohort inclusion, exclusion, all these things. I think it's really good discussion if we can somehow have a general guideline, like for someone who have to go back to our daily life to carry on the things that we actually do for our own jobs. If there is a guideline of, okay, high level, where do we start? What are the things we look for? How do we leverage? I can't remember the name of the tool that we have now. Phoebe, Phi. It's used to evaluator, right? So it's great too. But what do we look for in those tools? When do we use it? So those are the things that's going to be really valuable for the end users.
Yeah. Maria, do you have any comments? Alexander, any comments?
No, this was super interesting. This is the first thing I've been to with OHDSI, so I'll definitely be referring back to this recording and as I go through this process.
Andrea?
Yeah, I think it is interesting. I feel like the beginning maybe a little bit blurry in terms of making sure that we have the exact goal for the phenotype defined, because we did spend an awful lot of time looking at refining diagnosis codes, and to pick out an acute appendicitis event versus any patient with appendicitis, I think those are, we spent a lot of time doing that in the beginning that didn't seem quite as targeted towards the peer review. So maybe if we continue to do these sessions, really making clear the goal of the phenotype in the beginning would be really nice.
And is part of that just the nature of doing this being a phenotype for a phenotype's sake, as opposed to a phenotype with a research question in mind?
Alexander, that's a great question. Yes, but we can't, and maybe Gowtham and I are like almost against the flow here, because everybody we're all researchers, we all do studies, and we always think of phenotypes as a context of a study. So that's our experience. That's all and it's 100% true. However, what is the point of a phenotype library if the phenotypes are made for a study? Then you don't need a library. Then every time you have a study, you have to come up with a phenotype. So Gowtham and I are coming from we're trying to make a resource for the community that includes phenotypes that can be used for studies. If every phenotype is custom for a study, that make idea of a library absolute. Okay. I understand that some people think of it as a documentation solution. So as not put those in the library and then document how you use it, and then it's fine. I went that route, and I think that is hard and not very, because how much of a documentation attributes of the study you're going to add to your library to make it possible for somebody to use it off the shelf, because they know their context is the same as your context. So we're trying to move it towards model the clinical idea, and then you can take that, and then absolutely you might need to do things to make it appropriate for your study.
Okay.
Yeah, so like continuing on what Aziz said, starting from something that has been fully evaluated and vetted by a group of scientists, and then doing some minor modifications to it and using in your study is probably a much better position than starting from scratch every time.
I agree.
Okay, so Gowtham and I will take the action into putting all this in response to the appendicitis as a peer review. And then Gowtham will have the work to finish the appendicitis. And we will, once we have the fee evaluator results, we can, I'm sad that we don't have it to discuss what those numbers mean now that we look at the clinical profile, because looking at that clinical profile of appendicitis people in this cohort gives me the idea that it's a high specific cohort, right? We are finding all the things we expect. So I'm expecting the PPV to not be high, but we'll see the numbers from the evaluator.
Sensitivity would probably be lower because of the inpatient rule. And we do have index-led corrections that needs to be done. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording now.
You stopped it. Oh, no, you didn't. And then we have to go to our lives.
Maybe that's wise.
Stop it. Record. Stop recording. And